I always say as a reminder, first to myself and then to you, that when we listen to a scripture passage, we always look for two things. One is, what's it tell us about God? And the second part is, what does it tell us about our response? Okay? And I don't know about you, but I've been really troubled these last few weeks about this growing immigration issue. And we look at all of this and we don't really know where to go, and there's a lot of cantankerous conversations about it. And I think that it's always good for us to look for biblical answers to these things instead of political answers. The politics will follow, but we need to look at what the fundamentals are. And there's three questions in today's gospel that I think really help us wrap our brains around this. So the first question out of the chute is the intellectual came to Jesus and he says, "What do I need to do to get to heaven?" And he said, "Well, you're into law. What's the law say?" "Well, love God with your heart, soul, mind, strength, and neighbor as yourself." So you kind of give God everything. Jesus taught that all along. So when we talk about loving God with our heart, we need to have a deep affection for God. So we go to church not because we have to, but because we love God. It's a desire in us. It's something that we want to share. It's because we have a personal relationship. It's like going to grandma's house. We want to do that. Love God with our heart. What does it mean to love God with our soul? It means that it's more than just a warm fuzzy. And so it comes out of the depths of who we are, that we want to have that relationship with God, that it's something that's deeper. It comes out of the core of who we are. It's an organizing principle in our life, loving God with our soul. What does it mean to love God with our mind? Well, it's like we were 20 years ago wearing those bracelets that said WWJD, what would Jesus do? It's beginning to think like God. So that's one of the reasons why we come to church, to get instructed with His Word so that we can think the way Christ thinks. Love God with our mind. And then the last one, love God with our strength. That means it's not just pious thoughts that we have in our head, but it really is something that calls us to action. So Jesus just didn't come to earth and say, "Well, think about that." He Himself inserted Himself into the situation and helped to change things. Love God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and then our neighbor as ourself. And so there's something that's crept into Christianity over the centuries that's made a kind of a me and Jesus thing. Me and Jesus is not what's read in the Scriptures. It's not a private affair, And so it calls us out of ourselves, out of our own comfort zone, out of the people who we like, the neighbors that we choose, and it gives us a much broader approach, okay? So what do I need to do to get to heaven? Heart, soul, mind, strength, neighbor as self. Then comes really, I think, the most critical question is the second one, which that guy asked. Because it said, because he wished to justify himself. Now, if you and I get into a situation that we have to justify something, we're trying to defend something. So he was trying to defend his own way of life, his own way of interpreting things. So who is my neighbor? Okay? He had a sense that there was more, but he didn't really want to find out. And so instead of giving Jesus giving an answer, he told him a story. And the story about a guy who got beaten up and left for dead. And so it's pretty instructive for us. First of all, the first one who went by was a priest. And this translation says, and he just went on his way. A lot of the other translations said, I don't know what's the one that was in the hymnal today, but it said he crossed to the opposite side. And so that represents the religious right who says, this isn't my circus, not my monkeys, I'm not going to get involved in this. Religious, but that's about all. The second one was a Levite. Do you know what the Levite represents? The political conservative. Okay, those who are saying, well, he should have known not to come down that road. He should have known those people were going to do that to him. He should have, not my business. They kind of got what they deserved, unfortunately, and so they avoid it. But then who was the third one? The what? The Samaritan. Do you know anything about Samaritans in Jesus' time? People of Samaria? They were despised. They were despised. So even to say the Good Samaritans, kind of like, duh, really? So they were despised. And so what did the scripture say? The Samaritan traveler who came upon him was moved with compassion at the sight. He approached the victim, poured oil and wine over his wounds as a source of healing. Kind of makes you want to get beat up, doesn't it, if they're going to pour wine all over you? And so then he hoisted him up, took him to an inn, gave the guy some money, and says, here, take care of him, and when I come back, I'll check to see if you need anything more. Now, that was Jesus' answer. It wasn't about somebody who deserved it. It wasn't about somebody that they thought was okay. It was somebody who was in need. And so it brings us then to the third question. So Jesus looks at this group and he said, which of these three, in your opinion, was neighbor to the robber's victim? And the response came, well, the one who had mercy, the one who showed compassion. To which Jesus says, go and do the same. Go and do the same. Now, that's where I think you and I need to be at these days. As I look at this, raids and cages and walls and kids who, coming up almost on 2 years now, who've not been reunited with their families yet, has nothing to do with mercy and compassion. I don't care what side of the political fence you're on, or if you're not even on the fence. That's mercy and compassion. Think about these little screamers we got in here. Lucy, how would you like to be in a cage? I don't think so. But that's what's happening. And so I think that we get into that middle guy's question because he wanted to justify himself. So we get into these ways of thinking, they say, well, they should have known better, they shouldn't have come here. And maybe you saw that awful AP photo that was out about 10 days ago about the father and the daughter who had washed up on the shore, who had drowned. We had a delivery guy here at St. Mark's this week who got going on that when he came in and was talking to us, and he was just sure that was photoshopped. For God's sake. Literally, for God's sake. In my heart, I believe that God will convict us of this if we do nothing. If we do nothing, and we say, well, them, there's this, that, I think God will convict us of that. And so, instead of trying to get caught up in all that, I think we need to say, what does it mean to show mercy? What does it mean to show compassion in this? That's really where I think we need to be. We as a country have not ever even thought twice about intervening in other countries to change situations that we thought were unjust. So when we have people fleeing because their kids are going to get sold into slavery or prostitution or fleeing drug cartels, can you blame them? So somehow you and I need to do this. And the thing to me that's the most damning is, one of the things that haunts me is that by last count we have about 68 million Catholics in the United States. The next second highest denomination is 16 million. We are overwhelmingly the majority. And if we would pull up our big boy pants and get it together, we would make a difference. But we've become just like everybody else. Just like everybody else. 68 million of us in this country alone. And I won't even get into the fact that many of these people who are coming are Catholics. Not that that should make any difference. So somehow you and I need to become the Good Samaritans. And I know that if we stand up for any of that, we, like the Samaritan people, will be despised as well. There's all kinds of arguments and all kinds of name-calling, and I'd rather put up with name-calling and arguments than to have Christ show me on the last day a little pile of dead kids in a cage. So we ask God to really move in our hearts to help us to take a look at this. And I think the questions are significant. What do we need to do to get to heaven? Love God with everything, our heart, our soul, our mind, our strength. And our neighbor is ourselves. Who is our neighbor? The people who are in need. And who is the neighbor to the one who's oppressed? The one who shows compassion. That we can do.